My name is Kameren Williams. Today I'll be talking about Kate Webster. In 1879, a gruesome crime shook London. It was the murder of Julia Martha Thomas. This is a case that would make Kate Webster infamous. I'll start off by giving an introduction of who is Kate Webster. I'll give you a little bit on her background. I'll talk about the crime, the investigation along with the trial, her execution, and end it with a conclusion. Who is Kate Webster? She was born in Wexford in Ireland around 1849. She is a maid who became famous for her role in the murder of her employer in the 19th century. She was born around 1849, and she was also born as a Lawler, Kate Lawler, and eventually changed her name down the line. A little bit about her. In her early life, she gained a reputation for theft. She was first arrested for larceny at the age of 15, theft of personal property. At some point around this time, she took on the name Webster, one of her many aliases. She was released. After she was released, she continued stealing until she got enough money for a ticket to take her to Liverpool, England in 1867, where she was caught and convicted of larceny again and served a 4-year sentence this time in England. After her release, 1872, she moved to London where she became a maid. Webster would rent rooms just to end up selling everything and valuing the room and taking off quickly before she was caught. But she was caught. She spent 18 months in Wandsworth Prison after being convicted of 36 charges by May of 1875. Shortly after, she was convicted of the same crime again and served a year in February of 1877. So the victim, her name was Mrs. Julia Martha Thomas. She was a 55-year-old widow who lived in Richmond, the Richmond area of London. She was very wealthy. She was a sort of secluded woman. She did hire Miss Webster to be her maid. About a month later, with Webster on the job, Miss Thomas decided to fire her, mostly because of her bad work ethic. She would spend most of her time in bars instead of at the house doing her job. On to the crime, the murder. On Sunday, March 2nd, Webster had waited for Thomas to return from church. Earlier that day, Thomas had told her that she was tired and that she needed to leave. So Webster waited for her to return from church. Webster attacked her with the axe and killed her. Webster dismembered her body. She removed the head, the limbs, just chopped the lady up. She boiled down the parts of the body in this big copper pot. She removed the flesh and the fat from the bone. Later on, the next day, she decided to burn the bones in the fireplace, and she packed up the rest of the body parts, put them in a box or put them in a bag, and she threw them in the Thames River. Some of the remains were recovered about a day later, but the evidence didn't lead to Webster since Mrs. Thomas wasn't reported missing at that time. It was even alleged that she tried selling the victim's boiled down remains as cooking fat or as lard to the town people. Some reports would suggest that Webster killed Thomas over personal grievances, possibly due to her employer's strictness or maybe just a desire for more money. The discovery, Webster, for the next 2 weeks, decided to take on Thomas's identity. She lived in her victim's home, impersonated her, she dressed in her clothes, and she even hired tradesmen to buy things out of her house. She even sold her victim's bridge work, which included her teeth. that were attached. A neighbor decided to call the police when she noticed that Thomas's furniture was being taken out of her home. Of course, the police arrived, tried to investigate that matter, and Webster decided to. She fled. She attempted to hide in her hometown of Ireland, but authorities tracked her down. This was on March 28th, 1879. They say she was still wearing Thomas's dress and rings. This led to her trial. Kate was tried for the murder. The trial began on July 2nd, 1879. It was a very public trial. It was all in the newspapers, being called things like savage, barbaric, and callous. Webster, of course, pled not guilty at her trial, and she continued to keep up her innocence up until the day before her execution. She was she unsuccessfully tried putting the blame off on many other people, but that didn't work. Also, before sentencing, she tried to plead her innocence again. She claimed to be pregnant. The reason she did this is because executions of pregnant women, they were postponed until after they gave birth. But a jury of matrons, they examined her and proved that she was lying. On July 28th, this was the eve, or this is the eve of her execution. She finally confessed to her priest that she had carried out the murder and she acted alone. Um, so the verdict, of course, she was found guilty of the murder and she was sentenced to death by hanging. She was one of the few women hanged in Britain during that time, and she was executed on July 29th, 1879. Um, After that, the public's reaction was kind of mixed. Her case remained a sensation for some time, and she also became a symbol of dangerous women. What would happen when they stepped out of their traditional roles of just being a married woman with kids who took care of the house. The case reinforced fears to people that their servants would turn against them, turn against their employer. The case was also very controversial. Some people knew capital punishment was a thing, but they also knew that execution of women was very rare. Some sympathized with her, others felt like it was just proof that all violent criminals deserve the death penalty. So here's a picture of the newspaper that was posted around that time. Um, So ending it off, just summing up everything we talked about, Kate Webster, she was a Irish maid with a difficult past. She brutally murdered her employer, Julia Martha Thomas. She dismembered the body. She attempted to cover up her crime. She decided to boil her, dispose of her body parts. Her sickening actions, it led to a trial which shocked everybody, shocked the Victorian society. It led to her conviction and her execution. Kate Webster's crime was very violent and shocking, and people were, they still are very interested in her story. It has been retold in books and films and documentaries, making her one of the more famous criminals of the Victorian era. Here is cited a lot of my sources. I included one that had a short movie about her. Thank you.